Hello there.
Hello.
Hello there. Let me turn you up a little bit. You're a little bit quiet on my end.
Oh, I can fuck with that.
Try talking again.
Yeah, sometimes it goes to my shitty mic. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
I'm on my good mic. Let's see if the webcam's working. Do you want me to do video or audio only? Up to
You can do video. Yeah, totally.
Okay, sweet. I'd love to do video. I like to try to look into people's eyeballs when I'm talking to them.
Yeah. Here, let me make sure that mine is working. Yep. Camera. All right, there. Mine's working. It's like nice thing about using Discord is that it just kind of automatically integrates. Yeah, there you go.
Hi, friends.
Hello. And I believe everyone can see you. Chat, just like verify for me. It should be fine. It looks like it's fine, but let me know if everyone can see. Oh my God, you have a very magnificent beard. I do not remember that from the last time that we talked.
No, it's been growing since November. So if chat's actually going to be honest about it, they need to say what color my beard is, and then we'll know that they're not bullshitting or blowing smoke at the ass. So yeah.
All right. Well, we can let them. Well, I'll let them discern the color of your beard, but it looks good. Yeah. How you been?
Yeah, great. Life's good. So just doing the whole working corporate stooge paperwork shuffling thing while also doing the YouTube thing on the side. So it's fun. I'm sure we've had a similar. I don't know. You gotta tweet your shit posty commenters more than I do, but I promise you I deal with my fair share of assholes in the comment section. It's just obnoxious.
Yeah. No, I mean I totally get that. It can be very difficult to deal with it. Well, I mean like difficult, but also like I don't know. Sometimes
taxing.
Sorry, what was that?
Taxing, emotionally taxing.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually one of the biggest reasons that I kind of slowed down with content recently is because usually like I don't know, one of the things I'm known for is doing like debate content. Like I've been on panels, I've done debates here on my channel. It just kind of wears on you after a while, especially for people who you bring on like who unironically will argue that people should have their genitals checked at the bathrooms. It's like there's not a lot I can do with that, you know? Like it's just kind of like all I can do is kind of like performatively show the audience that they're a giant piece of shit, but like it it takes a toll on you, you know.
Well, and I can appreciate that, but at the same time, you kind of highlighted something that I have beef with. So like I'll check Vosh, but then I've had some Vosh takes recently where I've had to scale back, and then I'll jump on Destiny, and then basically that's a certain level of spice. So I was like, all right, I'm looking for my rational, centered, reasonable RGR content. And it's like last upload like 2 weeks ago. And it's like, motherfucker, like I got shit to do.
I mean, I've just been very, I deeply apologize. I've been very busy.
No. I'm giving you shit. Life comes first. And I mean, I wish you all the success in the world. I hope Twitch and YouTube, if it's something you want to do, I hope it's something that is viable for you personally. But life outside also has to have its role.
Yeah, no, obviously. I mean, I don't know. I do YouTube because like I like to try and make it into something where I can like talk to other people and make some meaningful change, but ultimately like I have a lot going on in my life and I do this to the extent that it kind of relieves me from some of the stress in life. I do this because I enjoy it. And I enjoy being able to talk about like these various subjects. Which probably all right. So we should probably actually get into the point of the conversation instead of just like back and forth banter talk. So there is a reason I brought you on here. But before we go too deep into it, can you kind of introduce who you are, what you talk about, your positions, all that, like everything that you think the audience should know?
Absolutely. So my name is Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I did steal that off of Contra. So, I'm going to go ahead and thank her for my quick growth because I'm very easy to find because it's literally her and then it's me.
So, like, oh, interesting. There are some people in my chat who are actually wondering about that before you came on.
Yeah, it's mildly purposeful, but our content and perspectives are completely different. So I joined. I traveled a lot. My parents were, I don't know, data nerds. They made a lot of money. being accountants for electronics firms. We traveled internationally. I speak a couple languages, including French and English and Spanglish. Not good Spanish, but I speak good French. Then, so I lived in Belgium for 3 or 4 years. At 18, I joined the Marine Corps. I went to Japan. I deployed to Iraq 2007, 2008. I did a pretty chill job. I was a supply guy, so I was in the rear with the gear. But I got some really good training and was trained during the height of the counterinsurgency. And I was deployed during what was known as the Surge, which did kind of work in Iraq. I got out in 2010. I got my 4-year degree from the University of Central Florida, and then I became a law enforcement officer for 4 years. I served in a city of 15,000 in not metropolitan, but it was a commuter city for Central Florida, so just one of those offshoot suburbs in Orlando. And I worked there for 4 years. I did some pretty intense shit as a cop, even though it was a smaller city. I have some friends who did some really intense shit in Orlando. So, seeing people killed, bad car accidents, almost killed a few people myself, dead, name a thing, I've probably seen it. Child abuse, drug abuse, rape, sex, people banging in parking lots, people getting shot in parking lots. I've kind of seen a lot. So the way I classify myself politically is I'm temperamentally liberal. I have a lot of liberal and progressive sympathies, but I was raised as a conservative, so I understand conservatives and libertarians a lot because that was kind of my culture for a really long time.
Okay.
And I do position myself center right. Most lefties and progressives find me incredibly sympathetic or reasonable until I start talking about guns or civic nationalism or immigration or a few other things that basically goes from, hey, you're one of the good ones to, oh, you're a piece of shit. And
Sure.
so that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I try not to be, I mean, like, I don't know, we've been on panels together before. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, there are things that I will push back against, but I mean, as long as people are charitable and don't act in bad faith, usually I'm pretty quick to reciprocate that. Um,
Well,
and
I'll
j-
toot your horn too, because I think you largely have this rhetorical style where you know how to package your communicative stuff for people like the people that you grew up with. I did watch some of your personal videos as well. So the way that you package your content and your ideas and your messaging and all that kind of stuff, I find it refreshing because it's not completely dismissive to the libertarians or the conservatives or whatever. You're going to draw your hard lines, but you package it in a communicative style that I think is, to anybody who has an open mind, they should be willing to receive unless they're purposefully being assholes.
yeah, well, I mean, like, oh, some people are saying gun issue is not right or left. I tend to agree with that, but I mean, that's not the point of what we're talking about. But I
Mm.
mean, like, yeah, ultimately, a lot of partisan lines don't really matter so much. I mean, like, obviously, from the totality of my platform, people will ascribe me, like, probably a sock them position, just based on the things I advocate for. But at the end of the day, what I'm most interested in are advocating for evidence-based policies or evidence-based arguments for defending and advocating civil rights. I just
Mm-hmm.
try to follow what the evidence shows to be true and trying to, like meaningfully move people. I don't like being the most principled corpse on the pile of bodies. Yeah, so I don't
That's a
know.
great fucking meme.
Yeah, listen. I think that Vosh started it, but I fucking love it. I have used it so many times because like it is a good sentiment. Like I really am not interested in just like shouting at people if I mean like sometimes shouting at people can be beneficial if I cannot reach them personally. But
Mm-hmm.
other than it's just a matter of figuring out how to be able to accomplish the goals I want to, which is ultimately maximizing good for all people. So yeah,
Yeah, and I approach it from a similar stance. I don't part of the reason I guess like branding wise or growth is like the enlightened centrist perspective. One, people are incredibly exhausted with it. Two, it's very hard to like punch left and then punch right and then punch right and then punch left, and everybody's pissed off at you at all times. You can never land on like solid labeled ground in which you can just I'm going to be a little vulgar, like rhetorically jerk off your audience and just tell them what they want to hear.
yeah,
So it gets a little tiresome, but I also think it needs to be done because of how polarized we are right now politically. It's like what I'm looking forward to in this conversation a little bit is I think we can kind of probably find some trigger points of where like I read the document that we sent me. We don't have to keep the conversation solely focused on that,
okay,
but I think I think there's like trigger point implications of the data set used. And maybe that's the point, is to kind of poke at the raw areas in society.
Okay.
But then the question is, what do you do with that? What's the solutions? What's the prescriptions? What's the policy? What would actually get passed by Democrats and Republicans? What would be publicly supported by both? And that's where I'm sure we could get bogged down into the details of the descriptive things that we feel rubs people wrong a little bit. But if we really wanted to keep the conversation focused, it might not be as sexy or as fun as screaming at each other for an hour. But it would probably be more productive towards what can we actually do with this hot mess of garbage that is modern politics.
I mean, yeah, like I'm ultimately like, yeah, no, I'm looking to actually pass policy. I'm not looking to just, like obviously the data says what it says, but I'm very interested in being able to make that into a real solution. So to catch
Mhm.
people up, I'm pulling it up on the screen. So essentially, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'll just catch the audience up. So
Mhm.
I published this doc that we prepared about a week ago on police use of force and specifically excessive use of force, and kind of just summarizing all of the data that's been collected on excessive use of force. And essentially, the takeaway from the data as I'm seeing it is that, like, excessive use of force is a problem. Our police kill civilians at rates higher than comparable developed democratic countries and disproportionately kill people of color despite the fact that they're more likely to be unarmed. I know that you messaged me and said that while you might not, and you can correct me if I am misstating this, you said that while the data while I'm citing the data correctly, there may be other implications that may alter how these data points are seen or characterized.
Mhm.
So, what's your interpretation of this data?
Yeah, sure. So for instance, like what I try to do, so my frustration, because I literally feel like trapped between two worlds,
Okay.
is I don't care if we bring up uh, the cop 40% statistic, which for those of you who don't know, it's largely a fucking meme, but it's basically like in 1992 they did a self-reported thing about like police domestic violence. I don't care if we talk about disproportionate killing of like people of color or violence used against
I
people
don't
of
think I
color.
brought up that statistic. I wasn't aware of
No,
it.
not you, not you.
Okay.
It's that's more for Mike from PA when he finally watches this.
Oh,
So, like
interesting.
he loves that stat.
Sure.
But I think it's just like stats. I don't care specifically if a statistic is like wounding to my ego personally, or if it's wounding to the general ego of law enforcement. But I would like to say that there's other statistics that people use, like 1350, and other statistics that can kind of like contextualize how these things kind of fit into like a larger piece. Like I don't like selective statistics.
Okay.
And then also these statistics by themselves. So, for instance, like if we brought up all the cop stats, and we could literally go line by line if you wanted to. And then I brought up like contextualizing information. Well, it's like if I'm trying to contextualize something that we both agree is a problem, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Like you can bring up a portion of the problem, I can bring up a portion of the problem. What do we do with that information is the real question. And that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation, was because so for instance, just to give you an example,
Okay.
the implication that police use or police use force disproportionately against people of color is that the police are racist. Now, whether that's interpersonally racist or systemically racist is a different thing that can be kind of nailed down.
Well,
But sorry.
there's actually sources in here that address that specifically. And specifically,
Mhm.
actually, so I'm not sure if you'll find this interesting. I'm not sure if you read through this evidence,
I find
or like
everything
that part, but
interesting.
it says that, oh, where is it? Oh, whereas there is evidence that although police officers who are most likely to have fired their weapons are white men, evidence suggests that the causes for use of force against black people may be rather motivated by institutional, organizational, and systemic causes. So basically,
Mhm.
there was an interesting study that we read through on stream together that showed that essentially there was a study that directly tested, like, all right, so police who commit violence disproportionately against people of color, like, are they racist? Like, that's the null hypothesis, or the null hypothesis is rather that, like, oh, so when you're testing for a null hypothesis, it's basically like that would be the hypothesis of saying no, police who act in these ways are not racist. right?
Mhm.
And then the goal of being able to conduct the study is to see whether or not you can reject the null hypothesis. And this is important because the studies could not reject the null hypothesis and found instead evidence to suggest that larger systemic causes are instead primarily the issue. That's not to say
Mhm.
that there aren't police who are racist who do these things. Like, when you don't reject a null hypothesis, that doesn't say anything about the nature of the people being tested. It's just we don't know. But there
Mhm.
was evidence to be able that they found that like larger institutional causes are a much larger contributing issue. A really big example that people often bring up casually in conversation is that like police are disproportionately assigned to neighborhoods which predominantly have people of color, and so naturally they're going to have a higher likelihood of being put in situations where they are going to use force against people of color compared to other people who are not assigned to compared to police officers who are assigned to predominantly white neighborhoods when they are not patrolling those neighborhoods nearly as often, right? Like,
And even like just to bring up how systemically this can and does work. Okay.
okay.
So for instance, when we're also talking about like intergenerational wealth and generational wealth and all that kind of stuff as well. So literally inside the city that I used to work in, there was a street that divided the black neighborhood from the white neighborhood, and then literally like it was just pop like right there, black neighborhood on one side, white neighborhood on the other. And then there was an east-west dividing line, and there was a north-south dividing line between the traditionally black neighborhood and everywhere else. And
Mm-hmm.
in the white neighborhood, these are all multi-$100,000 homes. Some of them built into the side of hills, some of them over a lake. Just beautiful. And all of
Yep.
these people have money. And one of the statistics that I always found interesting was that like white Americans consume narcotics at similar rates to Black Americans, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like 40% or some shit like that
Yeah.
for marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is you can patrol the white neighborhood all fucking day and never see anybody because everybody's inside their nice little enclaved, custom built fucking house.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're gonna smoke pot, they're gonna smoke pot inside their house. And then if they're gonna drink, they're gonna go downtown and they're gonna buy a taxi to drive home, or it's only a half mile, and they can use side streets in order to avoid the cops for DUI, all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
That's not true in the black neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
What's true in the black neighborhood is since people don't have as much material wealth, the local quick stop, like it's literally like a bodega that was built into the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
is treated almost like an open air bar. So the people go there, they spend their $2 or $3 that they have from working, doing lawn care or whatever the fuck, and they basically sit there and they drink. And
Mm-hmm.
as a quality of life, I would say borderline harassment, because like people get drunk and then they get into fights. So you're basically treating that bodega as like a bar, basically.
Sure.
Um, Basically, what cops would do, but luckily before I was there, was they would just go out there and they would do open container citations, and they
Oh,
would catch
really?
people with weed, and they would arrest people for weed, and they would like obviously like the people who are literally on the other side of the road
Mm.
are probably doing the same shit, but only certain people who happen to be people of color are getting harassed
Yeah.
because they don't have the same financial means to enjoy narcotics the same way that the middle class and upper middle class kind of. And of course, no cop thinks they're racist when they're writing a fucking open air,
Yeah.
container fucking citation.
Right. No, and I mean, like, I get that, Like, I can
Mhm.
understand how the individual cop in that circumstance can look like can be writing that citation and not see the disparate impact, because it's very hard to
Mhm.
see that disparate impact when you don't see the larger picture, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why I say like the cop in that instance, technically I don't know whether or not, I mean, like, I don't know, maybe there's like somewhere in the back of that cop's mind that like they're like, oh yeah, I'm really glad that I'm nailing this black person, but there's no evidence to be able to show that, and we can't say that based off of those kind of circumstances. It's the
I'm
same
sure it
as like,
varies too. There's cops who probably think that in the back of their mind, and there's cops who don't,
yeah.
and it's just a balance. And even a cop who I know doesn't, and I'll try to be very quick with this anecdote.
Mhm.
But I think anecdotes can add up to statistics, right?
I think that
So this
anecdotes can be
cop,
good to complement like larger data or larger observed phenomena. So
right?
yeah.
And I think this one plays into the systemic issue because like I know this cop very well. He's not interpersonally racist. Like I don't see color. Like that's, he's got a very 90s liberal racial mindset.
Sure.
But he was telling me like, oh, I really love this intersection for traffic stops. And I'm like, why? Because it's right outside of the, traditionally black neighborhood. It's literally a stop sign from the traditionally black neighborhood leaving into the other area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why do you like that stop sign? He's like, oh, people blow through the stop sign all the time. I can see seatbelts. People, have DeWillis, which is driving while license suspended. I can find weed, I can find booze, and like all that kind of stuff. So he's just thinking, I'm a cop. I'm here to enforce the rules. So I'm going to go where it's really easy for me to fucking enforce the rules. But what he's kind of not thinking, it's like, okay, well, if I smash that guy for driving while license suspended, and then he catches a citation, and then he can't afford the citation, and then he catches another one, and then he has to work in order to fucking pay his citations, and then I catch him again. Like, he's not thinking that he's basically starting this guy down like a poverty cycle where he just ends up in and out of jail for bullshit crimes that really, like, if you ask me, because I have some libertarian sympathies. I don't give a fuck. Like, are you a safe driver? Are you a competent driver? I care about that more than whether or not your license is in good standing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I relate to that. I mean, like, I also have libertarian tendencies, more to like, I don't know, if you're gonna like put me on the political or on the political, the fucking compass meme, I'm probably gonna fall somewhere like left lib, right? So I mean, like, yeah, obviously, I'm not going to care so much about that as long as they aren't infringing on anyone else's ability to be able to enjoy a safe usage of, safe use of the road,
Right.
No, I mean, like, that makes sense. There's a lot of people. No, I always try to tie these conversations back to both my own experiences in the South. So, like, one interesting thing about when I worked at Memphis as the program director for a homeless outreach organization was that there are a lot of people down there who are in those kind of circumstances, like what you described, where essentially the way that it would work for driving down in Memphis is that you would be cited on something like what you described or something very similar or small. And you would end up being someone who's in the position of relative poverty. You're probably living paycheck to paycheck, and you get the citation, and you have to be able, and then you're going to be fined like a couple $100s, and you can be able to go to court to contest that. Problem is, if you want to be able to go to court, you have to be able to pay the fine to be able to go to court, which is going to run you even more money. And then often people miss the court dates, or they aren't able to pay the fine to begin with. And so after they don't pay the initial fine, or they don't show up for the court date and they get an unfavorable ruling, well, that's going to tag on another fine. And it's just going to end up keep compounding over and over and over again until you end up in a position where people just have this mountain of debt and they're not able to do anything with it. And that's like a big reason why a lot of people in Memphis, and this will disproportionately affect people of color because they're in positions where they don't have, like, those are going to be people who disproportionately are more likely to be in these sorts of positions where they don't have a lot of financial wealth or access to this kind of information that would be necessary to be able to stop the shit before it starts snowballing too much. And so it's like one of the big reasons why we would end up having people coming to our organization because they were living in poverty or they were homeless, right? Because this is one like that, plus a couple other things in Memphis in particular would contribute to people basically being like amounting to having so much debt and so much inability to be able to deal with that debt, that they're basically condemned to poverty.
Yeah.
And so it's a
Well,
very, or sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say, and that was one of the things that I found was frustrating working as a law enforcement officer, was because I was working with some guys who they'd either become cops when they were 19 or 20,
Sure.
and they've been cops their entire lives.
Mm-hmm.
And $40,000 to $50,000 a year. You're not rich, but you almost have enough to pay your bills, right? Like you're almost making a living wage as a law enforcement officer right out the gate.
Yeah.
So they don't really know what poverty is. Whereas I had to work for a little bit before I joined the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I also put myself through school, thankfully with the assistance of the GI Bill, but I was still broke and I was working full time putting myself through school.
Sure.
And I was so broke, I had to take out a payday loan one time.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and what ended up happening, not only was it embarrassing because I basically had to give them like my left, all of my fingerprints, a picture of my penis and my butthole,
Oh
and
yeah,
like,
no, they will. Yeah, but please,
yeah.
actually, this is actually really good. So, can you describe to people what that experience was like? Because this is also a really, really big
Oh,
issue. I mean, it's an issue in Baltimore, but it was especially a big issue that I had to deal with in
it
Memphis.
Yeah, it was one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, but I quickly, I'm Irish, so I don't have much shame. So,
Oh wait, I mean, like, can you
um,
explain what a payday loan is? Because
yeah,
there's a lot of people in chat
yeah.
who probably have never had to deal with that before in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, like once you max out your credit cards, once you max out your all of your debt, and you have nobody else to turn to, you can go to a payday loan place.
Hmm.
A payday loan place basically takes your last check stub and they say, hey, we'll give you a third or a half of your last check stub, but we're going to charge you what effectively is like 300% interest.
Hmm.
And out of desperation, because I literally like I have parents, but they don't help me financially. I have friends and family, but that's more embarrassing than me asking a payday lender for money. So I asked, I go there, I give them a picture of my penis and my butthole. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like seriously, like the background stuff is like it's literally like all of your fingerprints, 3 character references, your parents' names, their phone numbers, your friends' names, their phone numbers, and that's because they basically they charge people who basically have no other options. So there's
Yeah.
probably like a high faulty rate, but or high default rate, but for the people who don't, you pay absurd amount of interest.
Hmm.
And what happened was I was probably making $10 an hour at the time. So what ended up happening was I just stayed locked into a payday loan for probably about 6 months. And that's just because I had no other sources of income, no loans coming in, no nothing. And I was just making $10 an hour. So I was literally paying my bills, taking out the payday loan. And it was like $50 on top of the $500 over like a 2-year period. So the interest rate was like, I think it was like 237% on an
Yeah.
annual basis or something like that.
Hmm.
So I'm just paying insane amounts of interest. And then finally, like 6 months to a year later, I just bump into the right financial situation. I have enough to pay it off. Ah, fuck, I'm finally out of the hole. But I know people because I have a lot of friends who are working class. I know people who stay in credit card debt for life, who stay in payday loan debt for life because they have enough money to be short $100 every single month.
Hmm.
That's how much money they have. And when an emergency happens, they're just fucked. And basically, they have to hope that they get to go to the ER. The ER prevents them from dying, and then they just don't pay the medical debt.
Yep.
So that's a situation that I lived, despite being a veteran, despite working full time, despite going to school full time. That was a situation that I lived for a while. And that kind of gave me the experience of like a lot of working class people are not evil, they're desperate or
Yeah.
they're fucked. And while people can make choices that I deem morally incorrect, I can understand the desperation with which they made those choices. So we still have to impose a societal consequence. You can't just say, oh, you're poor and you're desperate, so you get to steal now. Like, no, we're still going to impose consequences.
Hmm.
But at the same time, what would be better in society is if we made sure that people didn't exist like that in the first place,
Yep.
or if somebody got into those situations and they end up in the penal system or whatever. For some people just are shitbags and they need to go to jail. That's just true, and I don't care if your chat doesn't like that. Other people need help, and they need the ability to basically work themselves out of that pit that they're in. And a lot of people who end up in jail are nice, hardworking people, but they're just fucked. And that was an experience that I had before I became a law enforcement officer, and it was something that was affirmed after I became a law enforcement officer.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, it is a very hard situation. I've talked with my chat a bit about this before. Also, let me clarify the statement. People like that shouldn't exist. Let's just clarify, because some people will take that to mean that we should get rid of them in very not non-violent means. So let's clarify that, like,
Get
my
rid of
under
who?
yeah, let's clarify that, like, I think I agree that, like, we should resolve the systemic issues that exist in society so that people don't end up in those circumstances in the first place, which I wholeheartedly agree with. No, because I mean, like, if we want to
Wait,
take
were
this,
they?
or sorry,
Did
go
they
ahead.
think that I advocated for poor people genocide? What happened?
I want to make sure
I'm,
that
I'm not
people.
advocating for poor people genocide. If
I know
chat's
this is
confused.
this is your first time on my stream though, so I want to make sure that people don't clip you this, honestly, because I understand what you mean.
Well,
No,
welcome to YouTubing.
yes, I know. Trust me. Like I have a God, I have an eye for this. I basically have become like a consultant for people to avoid saying stupid shit because
Yeah.
apparently the first rule is if you say anything that can be clipped, it will be clipped.
But
That
see,
is
that's the fun is RGR out of context. That's like you gotta give them enough fuel for the fire so the RGR out of context clips Twitter channel can exist. You
whatever.
know, you're
It
technically
technically
denying that person unemployed. You're technically making that person unemployed if you guard your language so aggressively.
that person that actually that account does exist, and whether
Ah,
for
sweet. All right,
yeah,
I need to find it.
whether for better or for worse though, it does not have a lot of content. I'm not sure if that's a win or not, but whatever.
I think that's technically a win, like because that's
Yeah.
if you have IRL political aspirations, I'm sure they're more realistic than mine at this point. Let's put it that way.
I think that anyone can get involved in politics. But no, anyway, to
Yeah.
kind of talk about some of the things that you said. No, I think I broadly agree. Like the thing is, and I've talked about this a lot with my chat before. Like a lot of these conversations get at issues of like retributivism and utilitarianism, right?
Mhm.
I'm very critical of people for having like retributivist mentalities. You know, I think that people have a tendency to respond to certain situations with a retributivist mentality, which call for a more utilitarian approach. I think that also the inverse can be true. You know, I think that I do think that there are some situations, like I don't want to moralize retributivism and utilitarianism, right? I do think that there are some situations where retributivist mentality can be useful. Like, I'm trying to think of like a good example. A couple months ago, I got into beef with a online Nazi account called Stone Toss.
Mhm.
That is a
I'm familiar.
yeah, yeah, is interesting. Um, there is no amount of rehabilitation or like, oh, hey, I know that I know you're just mistaken and you just want me to reach you. Like there is no amount of that will ever meaningfully move that person. Like unironically, actually a neo-Nazi, right? There is literally no amount of utilitarian effort that I can do to be able to help that person. And I
Mhm.
think that there is a similar idea for people in society. Like, I want to be very careful because, like, I do think that there are two ideas that are not incompatible, but a lot of people can make out to be incompatible. I think that the idea that there are some people who cannot be rehabilitated, and the idea that most people can be rehabilitated, who we largely think cannot be rehabilitated, are two completely compatible ideas. You know? And
Yes.
so I brought, or sorry, go ahead.
Mhm. Oh, I was going to say, so this is actually, my parents are both Christian conservatives. I'm not particularly religious, but I still appreciate their upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like is actually like a really beautiful concept that my mom brought up that basically says hell is locked from the inside.
Mm.
Basically meaning that my approach to retributive versus rehabilitative justice is that we really need a dual system because you don't really know who's ready for rehabilitation. I was a piece of shit when I was a teenager. Part of the reason why I think I'm sympathetic to shitbags is because I was a shitbag when I was a teenager, and it
Yep.
took the military to kick the shit out of me in order to get me to be some semblance of a productive human being.
Sure.
And basically, what I mean by that two-tiered system is that, like, if you're going to jail fourth or fifth time, for some shit that like our society still deems as criminal and terrible, and you're like, fuck, I need to get my shit together. I'm tired of being a part of the system. I'm tired of being fucked over. I'm tired of being worried about cops. I want to provide for my family. I want to be a meaningful part of my family's future and my society's future. I want to go straight. Then we should have literally like a fucking sloped ramp for you to fucking get yourself out of the shit that you're in. So help you pay off court costs, help you pay off court fees, get you education, get you some kind of like anti-recidivist support package that helps you not end up back in jail or prison. But if on the other hand, you're like, fuck you, don't tell me what to do. You're spitting in the corrections officers' faces every day. You're holding up the middle finger. You're cussing out the judge. You're telling everybody that you're going to kill their family. And you're not interested in rehabilitation. You just want to be a fucking gangster for the rest of your life. Then fuck you. And you can stay in a fucking cage. And that's kind of my attitude, is having the dual system where the cage is locked from the inside. The second that you want rehabilitation, we will provide it to you within reason so you can become a productive member of society again. If you're gonna be a fucking piece of shit, then, iron cage for you.
Um, I think that logically follows. The one thing that I do want to say, because I think I broadly agree with a lot of that.
Well, be careful. I'm ready to be canceled.
No, you're fine. I mean, like, I don't really care about being canceled or whatever. I'll stand up for my beliefs.
Mm.
So I mean, like,
Oh, that's
the
refreshing.
so the thing that I really want to emphasize, because like, I don't know, I have an experience in this regard that a lot of people probably don't. I talked about this a little bit in the stream that I was on recently.
Mhm.
Um, Let me ask you this question: for that person in the cage,
Mhm.
who has done a lot of like, who so far has made no effort to try and make themselves a better person, all right? Do you have any moral duty to try and help them get the desire to improve
Yeah.
themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm not a religious person, but I am surrounded by religious people. I have a lot of religious people in my life. My father-in-law runs a long-term drug rehabilitation center for men. And basically he'll have people who will spit in his face, call him a piece of shit, fucking talk shit to him while they're voluntarily in a program. And some people are dealing with intergenerational trauma. Like, their dad was a shitbag, their grandpa was a shitbag, their mom was a shitbag. They don't know how to go straight. They don't even know what good looks like. So to even have somebody, and like I can speak from this personally because I'm a little bit of a shitbag. Being good or trying to be good is terrifying because it means caring. It means caring about things and caring about people and caring about your life and caring about where you're going and what you're doing. There's a certain freedom that comes from not caring about your life, not caring about who you hurt or what you do on a day-to-day basis. There's a freedom in being a hedonistic sociopath. So basically, part of the reason why people stay hedonistic sociopaths is because they don't know that there's an alternative. Number one, and number two, because the alternative takes effort and it involves potential failure. And I think that you almost have to take like I don't want to be condescending to hardened criminals, but I almost feel like you have to approach their like inner child almost, where you're like, hey, you're 40 years old. I'm sorry the first 40 years of your life have sucked ass. There's a whole bunch of things that in your life that went wrong, but you don't have to like me or trust me or anything like that, but I would like to give you the opportunity to. And you can offer that person that opportunity every single day or once a month or once every 6 months or something like that. Like even I want to say it's like Sweden or Norway, they actually have like a murderer in some kind of like work camp in like some distant place or whatever.
Mm,
And even though he's a murderer, he can go outside, swim in the lake, like all that kind of shit, because he's not around a town. And he spends his days remote working as a computer programmer for a company that he video calls into. And like I can only think of like this dude's a heinous motherfucker who ended the life of somebody else. And the retributive model is fuck this guy, let's throw him in a cage, never let him see the light of day again.
sure.
But they're allowing him to recoup the smallest amount of his humanity while keeping the rest of the society safe. And I think that is kind of weirdly beautiful. And I'm gonna let a dog in, but I'm listening.
You're fine.
Stay back.
I have to think about the implications of like having prisoners do labor, because there's like some weird elements of here, like how that plays out in the US. But broadly, I think I agree with that. Um,
It's not forced. It's entertainment. And also on top of that, there's things that um prisoners could do. So for instance, like I am not okay with like forced labor below the minimum wage, like making 75 cents an hour for fucking making license.
sure.
And I'll try to keep this brief because I know I talked for like fucking 10 minutes. But at the same time, like there's commissary. You know what I'm saying? Like you can get snacks in jail. You know, there's some things that you can do in prison, and then if you were going out of prison, getting an education, working remotely while you're waiting to get on parole or probation, and then basically putting those funds into a anti-recidivism account where you're getting paid a normal wage, but then you have a nest egg for when you leave the system. I think that's great.
Yeah. No, I like the idea in principle of while people are serving time, that they can be able to get that they could be able to study and acquire skills that would actually be able to help them get hiring and get jobs outside, like once they leave prison. Just by virtue of the fact that like it's very like one major issue. So like again, I'm going to talk about my time working down in Memphis. A lot of people who came to us, like we would index people who regularly came to us, and the vast majority of people had already been in the system once, and we would ask them like, "What happened?" They're like, "Oh, well, I couldn't find work because I'd been in prison." Right? It's a
Yep.
really big issue, and so being able to acquire the means to be able to find work after prison can certainly be a wonderful, wonderful change to be able to implement. Um, Again, like that would like so as far as like changes that we would need to be able to implement in order to be able to achieve that, definitely not working for absolute minimum wage, or not minimum wage, like 75 cents an hour. And also a related issue is the fact that like a lot of essential care has to be bought through there. So like a really good example is like a lot of um menstrual products have to be bought through, you know, those like through those kinds of systems, right, for that pay. And so
Mhm.
you often have women or other people who would need those products put in positions where they have to spend all of their saved money on those kind of products, right? And obviously we don't want certain people to have to be forced into not being able to save as much money as other people, right? But no, broadly, I agree with the idea that like people should be able to acquire skills. Like I agree that like broadly, how we handle the criminal justice system should be primarily geared at rehabilitation for as many people as we are able to achieve. I also don't want so like we've gone down a very long tangent about rehabilitative justice. Do you mind if we go back a little bit to talking about what we were coming here to talk about in the first place, which was
Sure, absolutely.
police reform? All right, cool.
Yeah.
So actually, I'll try
Also,
and
I'm open to additional chats too. So you know,
oh
don't hesitate to reach out.
yeah, totally. No, this is going. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this. So yeah, we can
if
definitely talk
we
about doing something again.
if we end up tangenting and beach balling all over the fucking place and we can't squeeze it into an hour or 90 minutes, I'm okay with doing other stuff. You know, doing rescheduling as well.
It's all good.
Um,
But yeah, so I mean, like, just to kind of bring it back in, right?
mhm.
Because kind of kind of bringing it back to the conversation we were having. Like, I'm definitely not making the argument that like every individual person who participates in the system is individually a racist person, or even that the people who are operating with like a kind of like overt racism, like, oh yeah, I'm doing this so I can harm the black people, right? I think
Mhm.
that a lot of it comes from like institutional biases, driven by like a lot of I don't know, like we all know casually racist people, right? Or people who may not think of themselves as racist, but also strictly define racism as locking up black people in the cotton field and can't self recognize when they're doing these kinds of other things that may lead to disproportionate effect of certain people from certain backgrounds. Um, I guess that the kind of solutions I advocate for in regards to police excessive use of force, it seems to be so like there was a couple interesting stats that in cities with more restrictive use of force policies are associated with fewer police killings, which is why recently I testified in the Maryland in front of the Maryland Congress on a police use of force bill. It was specifically a bill that would require when an officer knew or reasonably should know that another officer is using excessive force, like force which explicitly is more excessive than what the situation calls for, then that officer, the other officer who sees it happening, would have a duty legally to intervene and stop that, right?
Yeah.
It's my opinion that like that kind of legislation which is specifically geared at like police holding each other accountable in the way that, for example, military personnel hold each other accountable,
Mhm.
and making sure that they do not use that there are penalties for police using force um, in excess of what a situation calls for, since it seems to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like you've been trained on police use of force, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of the manual and like a lot of the literature that I've reviewed includes that police are trained on how to be able to use force in situations, specifically like how there are different like levels of force or escalation of force depending on what different circumstances could call for. So it does not seem
Mm-hmm.
unreasonable to expect police to know when they are using force in excess of what a situation calls for, and to expect them to hold themselves and each other accountable to make sure that they do not do that, right? Like if a police officer has to take a life of someone, then they better be trained to understand when that's absolutely necessary, and to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they only do so when is necessary, and that each officer holds each other accountable to do so. Like I think that that kind of legislation would go a very long way in kind of
Mm-hmm.
resolving a lot of the grievances that both people, like for example from BLM has, since a lot of them are calling for police reform, and also just making sure that police are, doing the right things. Like, I don't know. I know a lot of police officers. Like, I expect that they can hold, like, I'm not trying to propose anything that's, like, unreasonable here, or at least I don't think that I am.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily think you are either, and I kind of want to potentially save your audience, any audience member, an ass whooping, just by doing use of force really quick if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
So basically, there's four levels of force, at
Mm-hmm.
least in the state of Florida. So passive, active, aggressive, and lethal.
Yep.
So passive just means that let's say that you're at a protest, you're sitting on the ground, you're not cussing at the cop, you're not yelling at him, you're not pulling away from him, you're not doing anything. You're literally just sitting there with your arms locked and you're not moving and you're not obeying lawful orders. Like if they're telling you to disperse, hey, this has been declared an unlawful assembly, you need to disperse, and you just sit there like that. At that point, I'm literally just trying to tell you what kind of ass whooping you can get based off of different tiers. Okay, so not whether or not that ass whooping is justified. So if you're passive and you're not resisting, then at that point, basically, you can be pepper sprayed, or people can do manual techniques. Manual techniques is just a really sanitized way of saying that they can bend your arm behind your back, stick you on your stomach, and throw you in handcuffs. Now, the problem with cops is that the training that they receive, I'm very lucky that I did martial arts in the Marine Corps. I'm very lucky that I went to a really high quality academy. A lot of cops don't know what the fuck they're doing. So
Mm.
if you want to be manhandled, metaphorically, in the way that a group of monkeys tries to fuck a football, then go ahead and risk it. That these. Sorry. I like my.
That was
I like
interesting.
my.
I'd never heard that description used before. That's a new one to me.
I like my colorful metaphors. So,
Sure. Colorful is a way to describe the words that you put together in a sentence. Okay.
true. So, so if you want to take that risk, take that risk. And then basically, as you go up the tiers, cops can use everything below that tier. So passive now applies to every tier that we go up. They can use that as long as they think it's reasonable in the scenario. So the next step would be active. So active is they grab your arm, and then instead of you allowing yourself to be put in handcuffs, you're actually pulling away. You're not trying to hurt the cop, but you're trying to get away from them. So it's still called active resistance because basically you're not allowing yourself to be put in handcuffs, which is your lawful duty as a citizen, which you might not be aware of. At active, you can be tasered. So you can be tasered, you can be pepper sprayed, you can be wrestled. Aggressive is where you actually bow up, or when you start kicking, spitting, punching, whatever. And aggressive is kind of like this weird middle ground where cops can kind of escalate the physical violence that they're using on you while not necessarily having any tools. So, for instance, if you swing at a cop's head or whatever, he can swing at your head. Basically, like it's not quite lethal yet, but they can use a baton, they can use pepper spray, they can use taser, they can use whatever they need in order to get you into handcuffs. And then lethal is codified, and this is almost nationwide, is imminent threat of great bodily harm or death to self or others. And that's a really broad definition. So great bodily harm to self or others, it could be civilians, it could be cops, it could be the cop you're fighting. And it could be anything from a fucking X-Acto knife, because that's still capable of doing great bodily harm. So even if you had like a Swiss Army knife with like a half-inch blade or a pair of scissors, that still can meet the lethal threshold. And then at that point, a cop can kill you. So
Mm.
if you're asking why cops in the UK can spend like 4 hours like wrestling a dude with a machete, but American cops just, like mow them down. That's because this is a nationwide standard for as soon as you see a knife, as soon as you see a pair of scissors wielded like a knife, as soon as you see a machete, you can basically kill that person. So.
Well, I mean, like, it's a little more than that, right? Because so the constitutional standard, because, like, for example, in Maryland, we just have a common law standard, which means that we are based on, it's the precedent set by the Supreme Court. So, like, quick legal background: most states have a use of force statute, which sets out exactly like what police officers are allowed to do as far as using lethal force, or what excessive force is defined as. Maryland does not, which is kind of a problem because it means that we're based off of common law, which means that trials which involve police using excessive force can be really, really, I mean, like, try talking to a lawyer and just be like, hey, what's the common law standard for use of force in Maryland? And they'll say it depends on a million things. But yeah,
Well,
but the biggest problem with use of force, at least at common law and in most states, is that it's often a reasonability standard. And I think that you kind of said that before, right? If an officer reasonably believes that someone is using excessive force. And the problem with a reasonability standard is that it basically just amounts to more likely than not,
mhm.
or at least practically what you would have to convince a trial judge that you believed. The standard would ultimately be just like more likely than not, Was it, or actually, wait, no, it's less than that. It's
Sorry,
is it
I have dogs. I'm still listening.
No, you're all good. I'm trying to explain like this legal standard.
Can
Is
I
it
help you?
reasonable? So like basically when you have a reasonability standard, all that means is like, is it possible that the person could have plausibly believed that the other person was going to use excessive force? That does not mean that the officer knew that the other person was going to use excessive force, but rather whether or not that the officer had a belief according to whatever they may testify in front of the court, and whether or not that belief was reasonable. And so the
But
problem is that
mhm.
often we end up in circumstances where people very obviously are not using excessive force, but an officer either will, may have a belief, but wrongly believe that they're going to use excessive force, or may not believe the other person is going to use excessive force, but can say in court that they believe that they were and can usually still get off the hook for it. And so usually what I try to advocate for is, instead of a reasonability standard, a necessity standard. Like that a police officer has to believe that something is necessary, or that like use of deadly force is necessary. Since it's like literally one of the only professions where someone could take the life of another person in the course of their day-to-day line of duty. Like that seems to require a higher degree of scrutiny than just having a reasonable belief for those other tiers of force that you described.
But the flexibility, I kind of got part of the reason why I name dropped Mike is because I got into it with him about like statistical differences between us and Europe, and I think a lot of those can be attributed to guns. Now, like whether or not you want to attribute it to guns, or whether or not you think that a whole bunch of cops should, like, if they don't see a gun, they should take the English model and like wrestle people with like machetes and fucking box cutters and shit.
Well, I know that
Kind of.
like the
Sorry, go
data.
ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that like the data says that like it's like the disproportionate killing against people of color. That's despite the fact that they are, what is it, 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed than white people. So we're
Yeah, but
talking largely
that comes
about,
down to like institutional bias and like prejudice, right? Don't you think?
well, I'm not sure if that has to do, well, hold on, institutional bias and prejudice. Um,
Well, what I mean by that is like, so for instance, if I pull over grandma and she's 60 years old or whatever, I don't think she has a weapon. Now maybe she has a weapon, maybe she has a concealed weapons permit or some shit like that. But I'm not. My alarm bells aren't going off.
okay, yeah,
If
but
I
like,
pull over,
or sorry, go ahead.
if I pull, no, sorry, I'm demonstrating systemic racism through personal
Okay.
anecdote. If I pull over four young black men and the car reeks of marijuana, despite me being a pothead in high school, is my spider sense going off? Am I a little bit heightened? Am I a little bit more worried about guns or knives or drug activity or anything like that? Fuck yeah. And it's not, I'm not trying to disparage anybody with that comment, but what I'm trying to say is that like basically the opportunity for mistake. So this is one of the things that I want to talk about with like statistics. So for instance, like police use force, whatever amount higher against people of color. They wrongfully kill or kill more people who are unarmed, who are people of color, like all that kind of stuff. But what you have to do with that contextual information is you have to bring it all the way back to the bottom. So the bottom for me is that Black people and brown people, whether because they're immigrants or whether because they were like historically discriminated against, tend to have less wealth and less access to education inside the United States of America. As a result, they are statistically more likely to be involved in criminal activity. Since they're more likely to be involved in criminal activity, that creates a cultural bias against them that they're more likely to be involved in criminal activity. And as a result, cops are maybe not interpersonally racist against members of that community, but they're systemically racist in that way, in which they're if they see four young Black males smoking pot, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, they're going to be worried about guns and knives in the car. Basically, that is just what it is.
Well, I mean, like,
So,
I mean,
mhm.
like I kind of see that, but there's also evidence that shows that like levels of violent crimes in the U.S. don't determine rates of police violence. Like when you look at
What do you
major
mean?
city, like when you look at major cities and like the rates at which they report violent crimes, it's not
Mhm.
proportionate to how much like police violence there are in those cities.
Well, so you're saying because the police have different tactics in different cities, right?
Well, I'm saying that like on report, so like the data is, they're like when you test for if there is a correlation between the amount of violent crime in a city and the amount of
Mhm.
police violence that is used in that city, that there is not a correlation between those two. That the increase of one does not positively or negatively impact the increase of another.
Do
So
you think any cops read statistics?
Well, it's not.
Like,
Well, it's not about whether or not they read the statistics. It's about whether or not they're impacted by them. So I mean, like maybe they believe. I mean, like going off of the point that you're
mhm.
saying, like maybe they're more inclined to believe that like people of color are more likely to be involved in drugs or crime. But the
Mhm.
evidence. I mean, like sometimes people will cite like 1350, and I feel like that's a very
Mhm.
disingenuous citation. But like in this instance, if we're talking about like violent crimes in the U.S., that doesn't seem to map on to like when police in different cities will actually use crime. So maybe it goes to like their perception. I think that
Yeah.
I'm fine saying that like it goes to their perception regardless of whether or not that perception is accurate. Um, but I
Yeah.
mean to
Well, in
me, like that
mhm.
like in that case, I'm not sure if I want to necessarily like I can agree with the idea that I'm not going to necessarily punish the police officer for acting on what they think to be an accurate perception, but I would then say that we should put a higher standard for when they should use force, or
Mhm.
especially at least deadly force, um, to make sure that that accounts for those types of biases.
Well, okay. So my point, what I was kind of like thrusting at there, is that solving the systemic issues is actually almost more important than the outcomes of the systemic issues. Because like if we so effectively, like I live in Florida, but I was born a Yankee.
Okay.
And one of the things about the Northeast, I hope you can attest to this, is that it doesn't, well, maybe not every Northeastern state, but most Northeastern states completely give a fuck about education. They just
Okay.
care. They just better funding, they give a shit. So basically for me, if you actually breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty and breaking the cycle of intergenerational crime is actually like 100-year long project that involves complete like systemic overhaul of our societal institutions, with education being one of them, early childhood education being one of the most important ones of them, and then some of those other shit like nutrition and like all that kind of bullshit. But my point is, like, by the time that a cop is interacting with a citizen, whether or not his overzealousness to perform violence on the public is informed by statistics or perception, it's already way too late. A police interaction. I try to say this because I'm not specifically talking about incorrect police action. I'm also talking about correct police action. By the time a cop is interacting with you, I cannot solve 30 years of problems in a half-hour interaction. I can't unfuck your family. I can't get you off of drugs. I can't make you unsteal that thing. I can't unbeat your partner. Like, it's already too late.
Can I be able to like respond to this on a couple
Yeah,
things?
please.
Yeah, because like here's the thing about it is that like I don't agree that there like you can have multiple different kinds of solutions to these kind of issues. Like I definitely agree that, you know, being able to reform our education system and being able to reform like yeah, a lot of these problems are very intersectional. And I don't think that
Mm.
like acknowledging the multiple ways that we can be able to address these kind of issues discounts the fact that some of them when they have shown to work should be implemented. And what we've seen is that like when we have states and cities with restrictive use of force policies, that are statistically more likely to be associated with fewer police killings, then it seems like we could be able to institute those policies and also talk about and implement the kind of solutions that you're talking about, right? Like if you
Sure.
have different kinds of solutions, then, you know, why not do both?
Well, sure, and I'm okay with doing both, so we probably don't disagree. But let me back up your issue. So the reason why I like the phrase "duty to act" so much is because the thin blue line culture is real. Okay, so
Okay.
basically, like, I don't want to fuck over my patrol shift because if I fuck them over, then when I'm fucked and getting the shit kicked out of me on the side of the road, they might not come to help me as much as they want to. The reason why duty to act when excessive force is being used by a partner is so good is because cops know when other cops are going over the line. They know when they're emotionally compromised. They know when they're fucked up. We know cops on their shift better than they know their own fucking family. Like it's a very intimate thing. We know each other's work habits. We know each other's emotional stability. We know each other's stressors. We know each other. Like we know who, like, whether or not that person's cheating on their wife before their wife knows. Like, we fucking know. We know everything.
Okay.
So it's basically family. So in order to betray family, you have to have a really good reason. And duty to act is a really good reason. Basically saying, like, I might love Tim, but Tim is being incredibly rude and kicking somebody who's basically already in handcuffs, and that's unacceptable. And on top of that, I have a legal duty to act. I can now say, Riley Grace Roshong, the assistant state attorney for fucking Baltimore, is gonna fuck me up if I don't fuck you up. So Tim, get your shit together. Pop. Leave that fucking person alone. And on top of that, I'm reporting that to my chain because if I don't report you, then I'm putting my career on the line. And that's where I think the dude, like, we can kind of take it from there. But I just wanted to say we probably don't disagree that you can attack a problem from multiple angles. And on top of that, the duty to act phrasing, I think, is actually really strong and really good.
Yeah. No, I mean, I tend to agree with that. I mean, it's like an honor code, you know. You see
Mhm.
this instituted in like various institutions, like various workplaces, organizations, colleges. So a lot of people who watch me, who are like college age, can probably understand this, right? Like a lot of people will act in their own self interest, even though, because I mean, like there's some here. Let me look at this. There's some data that shows that like even if like some people will interpret this very anti-cop to say that like basically police officers will never rat each other out. There's certainly evidence to show that like there are a lot of police departments that are very predisposed to not report on other officers' misgivings. The data is mixed on how prevalent that is, but it's
Mhm.
not unusual for police officers to be aware when their fellow officers act out of line, at the very least. And
Can I?
so,
Can
or sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
Or I,
Oh,
I
I
was
was going
gonna
to
say,
say I have a solution.
okay,
So actually, it's kind of fortuitous that I was watching just random YouTube clips, and the movie American Gangster popped up with Denzel Washington.
okay,
It is about the heroin trade in, I want to say, the 70s or the 80s in New York, but it also is about police corruption.
mm-hmm.
And effectively, it was about one straight cop who was not trusted by the drug enforcement unit because he was the only cop who basically was straight, and everybody else was taking bribes and all that kind of shit, using their position of authority to manipulate criminal organizations while also capturing drugs and then either reselling drugs out the back door or taking cash payments in order to look the other way. So the way that this all ended up being resolved was third-party accountability. This cop involved, and if I remember correctly, he involved the federal government. They did a whole bunch of stings. All the dirty cop, or a decent chunk of the dirty cops, went away for pretty severe sentences. And then as a result, cops are now afraid to be dirty because they know that if they're dirty, they can catch 10 or 20-year sentences for being fucking dirty.
Sure.
So that's a long way of saying third-party accountability. And I'll use an example really quickly in the state of Florida. State police will arrest city and county police in the state of Florida. They don't care. If you commit domestic violence, if you fucking get caught speeding, you'll get a ticket. If you do something fucked up in public, you will get arrested. They do not give a fuck, and they do not look out for other people. It's just known in the state of Florida that a state police will arrest a fucking city or county cop at the drop of a hat. Basically, what I would say is when it comes to serious corruption, serious use of force, serious complaints, the death of a member of the public, all of those should be investigated by a specific unit in the state police whose sole job is to hold city and county jurisdictions accountable.
That could be
Basically,
better. I mean, like, just to
cops
give
who
you,
police
or sorry, go
cops.
ahead.
No, that's it. I was just going to say cops who police cops.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, there was a similar, I'm trying to remember, last year when I was researching for the AG's office in Maryland, there was a similar issue that had come up when researching a lot of stuff that had happened in Maryland, because what we currently had on the books, or no, not what we currently had on the books, like a lot of prior use of force statutes that try to get passed because we don't currently have one. Often a necessary part of a use of force statute, if you want to be able to get it passed, is to establish who the investigating body would be in use of force cases, right? And that actually ends up being a really important thing, because a lot of people will try to advocate that those investigations should be handled by people within the department. Yeah,
No.
yeah, exactly. And to anyone with half a brain, it should be pretty easy to recognize that there is a pretty massive fucking conflict of interest there. If you have if the person literally investigating your use of force case is the person who you like were out serving with on patrol the other day, right? And that's not me trying to be mean. Like, that's just trying to acknowledge that, like, listen, we want these investigations to be handled impartially by a third party. I think that what you're saying, that the idea that you put forth makes sense. I know that other ideas that have been pushed have been, for example, in Maryland, a lot of prior bills that have tried to institute a use of force statute would suggest that, like, it would be either a group, or it would be either a committee or an individual appointed by the attorney general or the governor. The attorney general idea sounds pretty good, in my opinion, just because they oversee a lot of very similar, like, for example, the organized crime division oversees, like, they have a lot of interaction with police from kind of an oversight position. So that seems like something that's reasonable. They would know enough about how police operate while having a degree of impartiality to be able to conduct themselves in a fair manner. But yeah, the most important thing is just making sure that there's no one who is biased in favor or against them, that everything is just investigated as, neutrally and objectively as possible.
Well, and let me share from my side, because that makes me a little uncomfortable, but I'll share why, not
Okay.
as like an attack. But basically, like, fuck attorneys. So like,
Well,
and
you put me in an awkward
and
spot.
yeah, I know. But what I mean by that is that the fear from a law enforcement perspective, and I do mean fear, is that people who have not done the job, who don't understand the fear, who don't understand like, it's not supposed to be personal. We're just supposed to be jail robots, right? We're just supposed to show up to the scene of crimes, investigate them, document all the evidence, report it to the state attorney's office in a timely manner, arrest people without getting butt hurt that they said that they were going to kill us and kill our whole family, and then, report to work the next day completely unemotionally disturbed by the job. That's what we're supposed to do. But that's not what we do. Okay, we're human, we're emotional, we're stupid, we make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are well contextualized for the situation, sometimes they're not. So what I would want, even as somebody who advocates for third-party accountability, is I would want either a board or a team of law enforcement officers, basically law enforcement officers who should be hand selected specifically for being clean, for wanting the job to be done right, for setting this higher standard for what law enforcement can and should be, but who have also walked in the shoes of the people who have done the work. So that's where it's like, it doesn't all have to be cops. It could be 50-50, 60-40, something like that. But basically, if my life is on the line, if my freedom is on the line, if my civil responsibility to lawsuit is on the line, I want people who have actually done the job before to be the people who are judging what I did. So
I think that makes sense. I can understand the concern that, making sure that the people who are investigating um, actually understand what police officers go through. The idea of having it be a selection of officers who predominantly are like quote unquote clean, or who have an actual desire to enforce a higher standard of scrutiny, or like I don't know, like like I always like to think like the military is able to do this shit. They do it pretty well,
mhm.
being able to have a similar culture within law enforcement sounds like a pretty good thing. We should incentivize that. That sounds good. And so being able to like have a panel of people who are trying to foster that kind of accountability and community, that sounds like a good thing to me. So I think I can get behind that idea. Um,
Yeah, and so this is actually Vosh's idea, so I'm going to give him credit. But the uniform, he kind of said this, and then he never repeated it again, which actually pisses me off because I think it's a genuinely good idea that could actually change things.
hmm,
So the military has a uniform code of military justice. It's basically a code of laws that specifically applies to the military, that's administered by the military.
hmm,
But it's almost like a higher and stricter version of legal code that it applies to military members.
okay.
States could pass individual laws if they wanted to, or they could pass a body of laws. They could create their own institution, like I said, like a department within the state police, in order to investigate other cops. But basically, like, what it would be is laws that are specific to law enforcement. So, for instance, like larceny or whatever, like grand larceny, stealing over $300 for a civilian, that's still a felony. You can catch, like, I think it's a third-degree felony in the state of Florida. You can catch 5 years for it. Now, the reason why a cop will never be convicted of felony theft is because basically every single cop knows that if they go to jail, then there's a high chance of that they are going to be treated basically by their fellow inmates as like a serial rapist or a child molester. Like there's a high degree that former cops are going to be threatened with death or great bodily harm if they go to jail. So
Hmm,
smaller crimes, I'm not saying they're looked over, but the chances of being successfully prosecuted and convicted of a crime as a cop are, for lower crimes that like people are going to look the other way on, is lower because they know the bar is so high for the punishment that can be meted out. However, if you had a uniform code of law enforcement justice, you could say, you're a cop. You're supposed to fucking have a higher standard. If you steal, you're getting every single day of the 5 years, and we're gonna stick you in a fucking jail where you can't be fucking murdered, or like you can't be murdered or stabbed or whatever. But if we find out that you are breaking these small level laws or these higher level laws, then we will fuck you up. And like you cannot understand the motive. Maybe you can, the motivation of fear for people to be on their best behavior. And also, like, so for instance, lying on a police report, like the killing of it was that kid in Chicago. He was high on PCP. He had a knife. Chicago covered it up. Rahm Emanuel covered it up.
I can't remember.
Yeah, Laquan McDonald, maybe. I fucking forget, but anyways. So point being that, like, one cop did a bad shoot, and then four cops knowingly lied on reports in order to cover up that shoot. If there was a uniform code of law enforcement justice with an independent judiciary that was able to investigate homicides, and part of the uniform code of law enforcement justice was, if you lie on a report in order to cover the ass of another cop or in order to secure a conviction that's incorrect, then you get fucking like 20 years felon for life. And that would basically make it so cops would have no incentive to lie, because if they lie, they know their ass is on
That makes sense to me.
the line.
The only pushback I could give on that, not from necessarily whether or not it's a good idea or not, because I think
Yeah.
that logically sounds valid with me. I can only the main problem would be, I suppose, like getting that kind of law to be passed, right? Because unfortunately, my limited experience with testifying on police use of force is that like, even for, because I mean, like, we could agree that like the Police Accountability Act or like a complete police accountability law would be good for use of force. There was a lot of pushback when I testified in favor of that. Like there was a lot of pushback, which was really surprising to me because essentially a lot of the pushback was like very trivial. Like I went over a lot of them with people on stream. And it was just very surprising to me because a lot of the questions were very disingenuous. Like one of them basically like assumed that police officers would be punished. Like essentially one line of questioning was it was trying to make a claim that essentially police officers would be punished for not like for basically acting reasonably in situations where no other reasonable officer would have known that excessive use of force was being used, which the bill itself was very specifically written to account for. So it made the question seem very disingenuous because like if they had actually read the bill, they would know that the question that they were actually asking was moot, right? That the police officer would never be convicted for acting reasonably when they would not know that excessive force is being used, And so
the term reasonably and knowingly carry a lot of weight.
yeah,
And by that I mean, for instance, like knowingly lied. Knowingly, I'm pretty sure a good defense attorney can, argue knowingly until he's fucking blue in the face. So like you have to leave room for interpretation, gray area, reasonability, all that kind of stuff.
sure.
But I trust you as the aspiring politician to take dumb fucks like that and just fry them in public. So like
Yeah,
rhetorically to tear apart those arguments and to basically say, hey, this is stupid. This is the actual verbiage in the bill. This is what we're really trying to get done. We're not trying to punish cops for being cops. We're trying to hold them to a higher standard of conduct. And even law enforcement officers themselves should be interested because these are the ideals and aspirations that Americans have for law enforcement. And we're currently failing that standard. So why don't we actually hold them to the standard that we want American law enforcement to be? Steal my stump speech.
I don't have anything to add. I agree with that wholeheartedly. We're about an hour 15 in. I think that's actually a good place to leave it. I feel like this has been a really
Okay.
productive conversation. I like it.
Nice.
Do you want to shout yourself out and tell people where
I
to find
sure
you?
do. I sure do. So if you want to be, I do take hate subscribers if you don't like any of my takes, or if you don't like any of my takes that you find on my channel. My name is Connor. I run a YouTube channel called Counterpoints. The easiest way to find it is literally just to hop on YouTube, type in Counterpoints, scroll down past 3 Contra videos, and click on my channel. The other way that you can do it is you can find me on Twitter at Connorpoints, CONORPOINTS, CONORPOINTS. I am a chud. I do have chud takes, but I try to be as reasonable and smart as I possibly can. So if you enjoyed this or hated this, please come on over and have some fun.
All right. Well, hey, thank you. No, I enjoyed the conversation. And yeah,
All right.
let's do this again sometime. All right.
All right. Catch you.
All right. Bye.